On our program tonight, it is vote night in America. What is on the line for Canada? Ontario reports another record spike in COVID-19 cases on a day when MPs in Ottawa debate supports for small business and workers. And making the web giant pay. The Minister of Canadian Heritage will be here to discuss his new proposals aimed at generating another $800 million a year for Canadian content. But we'll begin tonight with the U.S. elections. What many consider the most consequential election of a lifetime in the United States is being decided, although it may not be over tonight. The polarizing COVID campaign in the U.S. has come to an end, and voters will choose 4 more years of Donald Trump or choose a new direction with Joe Biden. Either choice will have consequences, too, for the Canada-U.S. relationship, which has been marked by tension and trade fights under President Trump. Today, the Prime Minister and opposition leaders were asked about the U.S. vote tonight and what to watch for.
Obviously, elections matter, and we will watch the results of this one. But Canada is well positioned and ready to continue to work with the American people and the American government, regardless of the outcomes of tonight.
As Prime Minister, I will work very closely with whomever the Americans choose to be their president. The Americans are a very close and important ally, and it's important for the Prime Minister to find common ground and in the best interests of our citizens and to try to work together on issues. I will do that regardless of who the president is.
Yes, it is important for the world to say very clearly. I've said really clearly, I think it would be better for the world if Trump loses, and I hope he loses today.
So what's on the line for Canada tonight, and what should we expect once the winner is declared, whenever that is? Scotty Greenwood is the CEO of the Canadian American Business Council and a partner with Crestview Strategy in Washington. She is also a former chief of staff at the U.S. Embassy in Ottawa. And Colin Robertson is vice president of the Canadian Global Affairs Institute and a former Canadian diplomat in Washington. It's good to see both of you. Thanks for speaking with me. Now, Scotty, let me start with you. Lots of uncertainty over the election outcome and lots of uncertainty about what the results could mean for Canada. Canadian politicians, for the most part, very careful in their comments leading up to tonight. If we don't have a clear winner tonight, what would your advice be to Canadian government officials and how they should respond if there's a long delay in the results?
Well, Peter, Canada has been playing it exactly right up until now, which is to be invisible and silent as to the U.S. election. Obviously, there's no foreign government or foreign person that can have any influence or should have any influence in what Americans decide, and shouldn't profess to have a view about what the outcome is. So Canada's been playing it exactly right up until now, and I think we'll have to continue to exert that discipline during the period of votes being counted and votes being certified, because as you said, this could take some time. There are an historic number of votes that were cast early but won't be started. The counting won't begin until later tonight or even in the days that follow. So we're going to have several days, I think, of uncertainty, and Canada should keep doing what it's doing, which is to be virtually silent during this process. And I will say, not all governments are doing that. There's a lot of talk about other embassies and foreign governments that are expressing a preference, and that's obviously not the right way to go. Right.
Colin, the Canadian government of the time faced a long delay in the results, as did Americans in the Bush-Gore election 20 years ago. Zipped lips was the order of the day in this country until a winner was determined, but that was a civil resolution in the end. Donald Trump has refused to commit to a peaceful transfer of power if he loses. So if it gets nasty, how should Canada respond, or should it?
I think we wait until January 20th to see who the new administration is. In the meantime, as Scotty says, keep calm and prepare for whatever contingency. We have such vital interests that we do not want to prejudge what's going to happen.
You know, Peter, I happened to be in Ottawa in 2000 in the Clinton administration, and Ambassador Giffen, who I worked for, had an election watch party at his residence that night. And, at about 3 in the morning, it was like, well, at what point do we have to actually start kicking people out? Like, this thing could take a while. And it's a good thing we finally did, have people go home because
Scotty, if you invite Canadians to stay over, they'll stay for as long as it takes. They would have stayed for a week still, which it was before you got an answer.
It was a crazy time. I don't think it'll be this crazy. Colin is right. We will have a president sworn in on January 20th. There are different provisions, though, that could come into play. If the Electoral College, for example, is deadlocked in December when it has to meet, or if it's unclear, the 12th Amendment of the Constitution says it's up to the House of Representatives to decide who the president is. So we will have a president. It'll either be Trump or Biden, and we will know by January 20th. But it could be pins and needles between now and then. I don't think it'll take us that long. I think we'll know in the next week or two. Okay. But we'll see. It comes down to Florida, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, maybe Michigan.
Colin, a lot of Canadians would say, look, if Joe Biden wins, the relationship between Canada and the U.S. has got to get better. How safe is that assumption?
Well, as always, we'll look for, there's a lot in the Biden plan that would work well with what Mr. Trudeau's got in mind. Clean energy, social justice, corporate tax reform, that kind of thing. And so our objective will be to look for those areas where we can actually work with whoever the new administration is. Both administrations have talked about a major infrastructure program. Build Back Better, puts it. He's got in it something called Buy America. What we're going to have to do is pay them, as we did in the last big build project, to make it Buy North American, or at least have a reciprocity procurement agreement between states and provinces. That puts some of the burden not just on the Prime Minister and ministers, but on premiers working with their governors. Mm-hmm. And that will apply regardless. Legislators talking to legislators, premiers and governors. It's got to be an all-Canada effort, like we've seen over the last 3 years in the renegotiation of the new NAFTA.
Scotty, let me ask you. So is the question that simple? Who's better for Canada, Joe Biden or Donald Trump? Is that an easy question to answer?
Well, Donald Trump hasn't been great for foreign relations with any of our partners. He likes to kind of poke our allies and embrace our adversaries, right? That's sort of his, and he does it for a reason. He's trying to keep people off base, and he thinks he has better negotiating posture. So that hasn't set well in Canada. So I think it'll be a different, less chaotic, more predictable, more kind of return to regular order kind of approach with Joe Biden, and that'll be a relief. But regardless, Canada obviously will work with whoever is elected. Canada has done a phenomenally good job in working with the Trump administration over the last 4 years. It's been remarkable, actually, to contrast how well Canada has done, whether it's the negotiation of the trade agreement or minimizing the tariffs, such as they are, than several of our other allies. So, but I do think there will be a sigh of relief, if not for a partisan reason, but just a return to regular order. I think that's something that will make life a little bit easier in the bilateral relationship. Is the new NAFTA safe under a Joe Biden administration? Some of the things he's been saying about trade make you wonder. Colin, are we going to be back to renegotiating a trade deal if Joe Biden wins?
I think there are still bits of the new agreement that are going to require some teething pains, but don't forget, we had a majority of Democrats under Nancy Pelosi in the House vote for this agreement. There are provisions in this agreement that wouldn't be there if the Democrats in the House had not voted for it, particularly as it relates to labor and the environment. These were provisions that Canada had sought, but the Trump administration said no to. But in order to get it through Congress, they had to go along with what the Democrats, who had the majority in the House. So I think we're never safe. We always, but the fact that we had a strong number of Democrats back this, I think that works to our advantage.
Okay, I mean, Canada's always, everybody, Scotty, makes a lot of the relationship between the president and the prime minister, and that's clearly been strained the last 4 years. But, Canada's become pretty good at, and I think you both touched on it, sort of working behind the scenes. If you don't have a great relationship with the president, maybe it's not even that great with some of the members of Congress, you go to the state level, you go to the business level. No matter who wins, do we expect to see that process continue with Canadians looking to people outside of federal circles, outside the White House, to try and move along an agenda that satisfies both countries?
I think so. I mean, the playbook that was really refined during the NAFTA renegotiation is one that works well and should continue. And that involved engaging people, as you say, outside the Beltway, engaging governors and mayors and groups like ours, the Canadian American Business Council. We're working on something now, Peter, that we call the North American Rebound. And the idea is to create a community of people that agree that coming out of the pandemic and into the economic rebound, we're in it together. So the U.S. and Canada shouldn't compete against each other. We should work together and compete against the world. And so I think you'll see initiatives like that the governments will lean into as well.
Go ahead, Colin.
Yeah, Peter, we need points of contact. So just as we've done over the last 3 years, working governors, premiers, state and provincial legislators, cabinet ministers going down to Ottawa and seeing not just their cabinet counterparts, but going up to Capitol Hill, the Prime Minister doing the same thing and seeing leadership on Capitol Hill. I think that's changed how we do business, and it's changed it as it has to be because we have such deep interest in the United States. Yes, we're trying to diversify our trade, which is exactly what we should do, but still the easiest place for Canadians to do business is the United States. Studies show you new exporters who we're trying to encourage to get into the best we get involved in is the United States. So we got to be on the United States all the time. We have to know them better than we know any other country.
All right, Scotty Greenwood, Colin Robertson, thank you both for your time and enjoy the process tonight. A lot of people, obviously in the United States watching, but a lot of Canadians will be watching too, and there's a lot to watch for. Thank you both for your time.
Thanks, Peter. Good to see you. Good to see you, my friend Colin.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Scotty.
And a reminder that coverage of the U.S. election results will begin on CPAC at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, so in less than an hour from now. We'll be joining our colleagues at C-SPAN in Washington for coverage of the presidential race as well as key congressional races across the United States. Ontario has reported another record number of daily COVID-19 cases, 1,050 new cases along with 14 more deaths. The province of Quebec reporting 871 new cases, 34 additional deaths. And in Manitoba, a hotspot this week, a dramatic drop in new cases, 103 reported there today along with 5 additional deaths. Now, even with the high case counts in Ontario, the Premier announced today a new set of criteria for imposing or lifting restrictions in different regions, which could see indoor dining return to some hotspot parts of Ontario as early as this weekend.
We're trying to have this happy balance, and it's extremely hard, but we have to make sure health is a priority, bar none, over anything. Health and science comes first. Right behind it is the economy, to keep people's livelihoods moving forward and helping them any way we can.
In Ottawa today, members of Parliament debated a Conservative motion calling on the government to do more to help small business and their workers, including a pause of audits on small businesses that receive the emergency wage subsidy. And just yesterday, the government introduced a bill to deliver long-awaited measures to provide direct rent subsidies to commercial tenants and extend the emergency wage subsidy to next June. So let's talk about this with 3 members of Parliament to debate the federal COVID-19 response. Adam Van Koeverden is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion. Pat Kelly is the small business critic for the official opposition Conservatives and the sponsor of the Conservative motion debated in the House today. And Gord Johns is the small business critic for the NDP. Thanks for being here, gentlemen. Mr. Van Koeverden, small business been waiting a long time for these measures. Now the government would like to see them fast-tracked through the House. There's a big push on now, but why has it taken so long to come up with a new rent subsidy program when the government's promised it for months and knew the old program was flawed?
Well, the supports that we've been providing businesses for the last 9 months have helped immeasurably, but it's not to suggest that businesses haven't been struggling over the past, well, since March, really. It's been an extremely difficult time, and I've been in touch with businesses here in my riding of Milton over that period, and we fully recognize that more must be done. Just in the last week alone, over 4,000 new CEBA applications have been approved. That brings the number up to over 750,000 small businesses being supported through CEBA. So it's not to suggest that we haven't been doing anything over the intervening period. The KECRA, as it has been stated a number of times in the House by other members, wasn't accessible enough. So we want to get it right this time so that the businesses can access it. And certainly extending the queues for the next year.
Mr. Kelly, your motion today calls for more flexibility in the support programs for businesses in this country and their workers. What kind of, you've seen what the government's now proposing, what more flexibility do you think is needed?
Well, I think this has been the problem from the start with a number of the programs that they just simply many small businesses are left out. The government has acknowledged the problems that it had with its rent subsidy program, but here we are on November 3rd, and the precise details are still not known. It's not known when small business owners will be able to apply for this new rent assistance program, and meanwhile, rent has been due. And to your original question, Peter, this government did have a lot of time to try to get this right. They prorogued the House in August, and there's really no reason why they couldn't have taken the time over the summer to draft legislation and be ready to go in September instead of now here in November 3rd.
In terms of the delivery, part of that will depend on how quickly it gets through the House. It's legislation, so are you prepared to fast track it, your party?
Well, we haven't even had a caucus meeting since it was tabled, and we have responsibilities to examine the legislation to make sure that the government does get it right. If there are significant problems with an issue, I'd rather head it off quickly and get it right now, but certainly the opposition has no appetite for undue delay. We know that small businesses are looking for support and many need support.
Okay, Mr. Johns, let me hear you on what the government's now. You've been pushing the government as well to deliver supports for small business. We see those supports now in the legislation. So tell me if you like what you see now and whether you're prepared to fast track this. Let's look at the clock here. Everybody wants help to roll to small business. After this week, there's an off week of a constituency week of the House of Commons. So if it doesn't, for instance, get fast-tracked this week, it's not going to get done next week. So we're looking at several more weeks for businesses before they get the help they want.
Well, we've been asking for months for the government to table legislation to support small businesses, to extend the wage subsidy, to fix the broken secret program and expand CEBA. So we're glad to see the government come forward. But, the delays from proroguing Parliament, even the threat that they would go to election before supporting small business shows how disconnected they are about the needs of small business and the urgency of the situation they're in right now. So we need the government not only to move forward with this legislation quickly, but they need to also backtrack the secret program so that those that weren't able to apply from their flawed designed landlord-driven program, so that tenants can get the help they need that were ineligible, because those tenants are riddled in debt. They're waiting for help.
Okay, let me put that to Mr. Van Koeverden, and that is the big complaint from small business, Mr. Van Koeverden, is the new government measures are not retroactive beyond October, even though, as Mr. Johns has pointed out, lots of commercial tenants couldn't get any help because their landlords didn't join the previous program, so they've accumulated lots of debt. The government acknowledges that, as I said earlier, the program is flawed, so why not make these new subsidies retroactive and further back than the month of October?
Well, it's a reasonable recommendation and something that I think we should be discussing in the House. But unfortunately, for the last couple of months, we've been talking about other things in the House which aren't pertinent to small and medium-sized businesses. I know that in talking to small businesses from my riding,
but in fairness, the legislation on this was just put before the House yesterday. So, and that's when we note there's no retroactivity in it. So. I'm not sure how we could have that conversation earlier than yesterday.
I understand, but as Mr. Johns and others know, the previous iteration of the KECRA program was in partnerships with provinces, and with that changing, it's important that the program, be made to fit more small businesses and the needs of small businesses. And we've been listening to the recommendations from small businesses and various groups across the country to make a program that's more accessible and works for everybody, because we recognize that medium and small businesses are the backbone of the economy, and we're truly not going to build back better until they're back in good form.
So is your government open to the possibility of a longer retroactivity period?
I would be interested in having that discussion, and the first thing that needs to happen is it needs to be discussed in the House so that proper debate can occur, and if amendments are necessary, then we would look at those, I suppose.
Okay. Mr. Kelly, your motion today in the House calls for a pause in the audits of small businesses who received the wage subsidy. People who received the CERB are right now being audited. In fact, months ago, your party was calling for the government to crack down on potential fraud claims for the CERB. So why shouldn't businesses that receive the wage subsidy be audited as well?
Well, we are not opposed to audits. We are opposed to the timing. The government has delayed the introduction of much-needed support measures. The parliamentary secretary was, I think, beginning to lament that we hadn't been talking about this or talking about other things in the House, yet his government controls the legislative agenda and could have tabled these bills months ago. So for small businesses to suddenly have onerous requirements for audit when the new measure, when these businesses don't even know what the details of the new programs are going to be and whether they're going to survive, just doesn't seem like the right way to go. They could put this off until after the next coming tax season. So we're certainly pro-compliance, and all Canadians should be compliant with the law. But it's a question of resources and timing that they're putting resources into auditing instead of getting new supports out or extensions out.
Mr. Johns, where's the NDP on that? Whether we could put off audits of these small businesses to take one other burden off them while they try to get through this?
Well, I think it's the right decision. I mean, but like you just said, I mean, the Conservatives on one hand are saying that they want to audit people who've collected CERB, but they don't want to audit small business owners. We think it's the right thing to do to wait. I mean, I think it's pretty rich for the Conservatives on when it comes to small business relief. We saw what they did in 2008. I mean, of course, this is a much larger scale, but they left small business hanging. They bailed out large corporations and the big banks, and they need to pay their share, and they still haven't paid their fair share. I mean, let's face it, they talk about how they reduced red tape and reduced taxes for small business. Well, they reduced taxes by 1% in 10 years under Stephen Harper for small business, but for Canada's largest corporations, it was 6%. I mean, right now, we need to get help to people immediately. Okay. We need the Conservatives to get on board on our ask for the government to make the commercial rent program retroactive. And we need both parties to stop forcing and putting pressure on the Canadian electorate that they might have to go to the polls before they get the help they need.
But it's clear, it sounds like it's clear none of this gets out the door, for instance, this week. I don't sense an appetite in the House to fast track this through all legislative stages and get the money out the door, correct?
I think we want to move forward. We want them to stop playing games. And both big parties in terms of, pointing and seeing who's going to force an election over motions in the House of Commons when people are looking at facing their close or going into bankruptcy. Okay, well, the government's admitted their program's flawed. Why don't they fix it?
We'll have to leave it at that. Lots of debate on CPAC today about this. And so help is coming for small business. The question mark is still exactly when. But thank you all, gentlemen, for your time tonight. I do appreciate it, and hope we get a chance to talk again soon. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter.
Well, the federal government introduced amendments to the Broadcasting Act today aimed at forcing foreign content providers to contribute as much as $830 million a year toward the production of Canadian content by 2023. The amendments would give the CRTC the power to regulate streaming services such as Netflix, Facebook, Google, and Disney. If they fail to make financial contributions to Canadian content in film, television, and music, they would face financial penalties. Streaming services would also be forced to make it easier to find their Canadian content. So the federal government has promised to level the playing field in broadcasting in this country. Will this do it? Steven Guilbeault is Canada's Minister of Heritage. He tabled the new measures today. He joins me now. Minister Guilbeault, good to see you again. How do these measures proposed today level the playing field in terms of obligations between streaming services and traditional broadcasters?
Well, I mean, basically, that's exactly what you're saying. What we're doing with this bill is that we're ensuring that there is a level playing field between traditional broadcasters, Canadian broadcasters, and online services, which aren't right now subject to any regulations in Canada. So what we're doing with this bill is giving the CRTC, the regulatory body for broadcasting in Canada, the necessary tools to make sure that online streamers invest in Canadian stories, in Canadian artists, and Canadian culture, just like traditional broadcasters do.
Okay, why do you need to go through the CRTC? Why isn't there just a bill today in the House of Commons that forces the web giants to pay more tax, for instance, to support Canadian content? You could have done that.
Well, actually, if you look at how it's being done around the world, this is really not. I mean, the issue of taxation is an important one, and I'm not disputing that. But if you look at how Europe is doing it in France and in the Scandinavian countries. Basically, broadcasting is a complex sector, and countries, legislators put in place those bills, and then they ask their regulators to develop the methodology in terms of how it's going to be implemented. We do the same things with energy, for example. The government says, okay, well, this is what we want to do. This is what our goal in terms of energy development. And then we ask the Energy Board, or federally or provincially, in terms of the implementation of those legislative objectives. So this is not unique to Canada. This is how it's done, really.
Okay, these measures, you say, will result in these streaming giants investing more than $800 million a year in Canadian content within the next 3 years. How will you force them to do that?
Well, just like any other international company operating in Canada, that they have to abide by our rules and regulations, our laws, and if they don't, then we will. One of the things we're doing through this bill is giving the CRTC the ability to impose penalties, and substantial ones. So, if you're an online streamer, would you pay a penalty that's much higher than what you would invest otherwise?
I guess that's the big question, right? How hefty will those fines be? I mean, we've got a bit of it.
Okay, we could talk millions of dollars.
Okay, but when tech giants have been caught violating laws in Canada, they typically get hit with fines that don't amount to a deterrent. Facebook settled privacy charges in Canada earlier this year by paying a fine of $9.5 million. Facebook earned $6 billion in Canada in 2018 and 2019.
Well, you're right. I mean, the penalties have to force compliance if need be. I mean, we're hoping it won't get to that, but it's a formula that has been used in other countries. If you look at or the European Union, for example, a number of European Union countries have gone down that route since 2018. So it's a proven formula.
Okay, let's finish on this. You've also been called upon to make the online companies such as Google pay journalism creators for linking to their sites when they show up in searches. Is that the kind of regulation that we're going to get? Is that coming or not?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, what the exact mechanism would be is one thing we're working on right now. But in the last few weeks, I was on the phone or video conferencing with my counterpart in Australia, in France. Last week, I was speaking to the president of the Australian regulator that's about to do that. They're not doing it yet, but they're in the process of doing it. And we are really looking. These are the two existing models. So Canada is actually at the forefront of this in the world, but beyond France and Australia, no one is doing it yet. So we're part of this first group of countries that want to tackle this issue. And what we're doing right now is looking at these two examples. What makes sense in Canada in light of our institutions, of our laws and regulations? But we want to move on this quickly.
All right, so more to come. Heritage Minister Steven Guilbeault, thanks so much for your time tonight. Good to speak with you.
Thank you very much.
That's all the time we have for this edition of Primetime Politics on CPAC. And a reminder, coming up, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, U.S. election coverage with our colleagues at C-SPAN in Washington. Thanks for watching.